Welcome, Pamela Barba, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have Pamela here. She's somebody that I've been in community with for about a year. And she is someone who expresses her creativity in such unique ways. She's someone who believes that marginalized folks will lead the way to a liberated future. She's a design strategist who helps entrepreneurs and creators launch and scale their one of a kind ideas. And as a previously undocumented immigrant, she became an advocate for economic justice after her family lost everything and migrated to the US. Um, After spending a lifetime in the design and entrepreneurship space, she learned that safety and self trust are key in the creation process. She's now obsessed with helping marginalized folks transform their communities by demystifying innovation and guiding them to trust their inner fire. I love that. Her grounded advice, and trust me, it really is, has been featured on Forbes and on stages nationwide. Whatever the case, whatever the Wi-Fi is connecting, Pamela is on a mission to help folks start some shit. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you. Hey, Isha.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're here to talk about the creative process. And I just want to share that I so enjoy receiving your emails and seeing your posts because there's so much creativity in everything that you do. It's just bursting with creativity.
I love that. Thank you. I always think about like my 8-year-old self or my 7-year-old self, and when you say that, I'm like, man, she's glowing. Like she is so happy that that's what I do.
Yeah, and I'm every time I see something, I'm just so curious about how you make it. How do you do it? How do you make those beautiful posts?
Yeah, I mean, on a practical level, I think what you're referring to is a lot of like my Instagram stuff,
Yeah.
and that I use a program called Procreate on the iPad.
Mm.
So it is very much like drawing on the screen with a pencil. But on a more like theoretical level, I think I spent a lot of time trying to be something that I'm not. And so now I'm like just very rooted in being who I am. And it's a process. Sometimes I forget who I am.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of what comes through in my stuff.
Yeah, I do want you to share a little bit of your story and your background, your process getting to this place about to talk about the process of creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it really starts like I grew up in a small business family. And what's interesting is that when I was born in Ecuador, my family was actually like pretty well off. And then there was an economic crisis, all these things happened. And so we lost everything and we moved here. And so I always grew up around entrepreneurship. My mom was a clothing designer when I was younger. Now she's a floral designer. So my house was always like a place where innovation was admired. And then I went on to study graphic design when I went to college, picking a career that I knew that I could help my parents with like ASAP. Like I
Yeah.
was like, graphic design, I can help them with the business, marketing, all the things. Um, but, through that process, dealing with immigration, becoming undocumented, also like working with community activists and nonprofits and all these different industries, I started to develop this idea that like all of these people were doing something right. Like community activists, there's so many amazing things. There are so many cool things that happen in tech. There are so many cool things that happen in nonprofit. But it seemed like there wasn't like a place that like applied all of these things. So when I was 27 and I had this like fire within me to like do something to help people, I was really burnt out of corporate. Trump had just been elected, and I felt like I wanted to do something. And so I started becoming really curious about like, what if I could blend like my small business experience and what I know about tech and what I know about design and what I know about community organizing and create something that I can help my community with. So that was back in 2017,
Yeah.
with my first kind of project being Vamos Ladies, which was focused on economic empowerment for Latinas. And then I've just learned a whole lot since then.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about the design process, and that's really what you're wanting to come on to talk about today. So tell us a little bit about your journey in exploring your own design process, or your creative process rather.
Yeah, I think so I am a, you know, uh classically trained designer. I have my bachelor's of fine arts. And so in that process, so I learned it that way, right? And then when I went into like entrepreneurship and trying to learn about innovation, I learned it, whatever program I was in, I've been in a million different programs, I learned about creation in that way. And so it there is like a framework of like, you start, you have ideas, you try things. Once you try things, you pick, the ones that are working, and you kind of like keep iterating from that. So that's very much like the design process, the like UX, lean startup, like it's all kind of like the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, so my process has been to learn the formal process and then to break the rules.
Mm,
um, because a lot of the times being in those spaces, which are very male, very white male, they have a very specific way of asking you to show up in the world, which not all of us are able or want to do. So very much it has been about like learning, like, how does this work? And then learning, how do I make it work for me? And then as I started teaching other people, especially other women, I started realizing like, oh, kind of the things that I did work for other women too. So maybe like I'm onto something. Maybe there's another way to do this.
mm. So when you talk about the how in that white patriarchal world you were asked to show up, what was it like? What was
It's a
that like?
lot. So no feelings, no emotions, um, show up perfectly, especially in like design and tech. Like, don't you dare show somebody something in process or in progress. Like, it has to be done, it has to be perfect, it has to look effortless, um, and it has to be like, cool. Like, it can't be something everybody else is doing, but also like it has to fit within like a mental picture of what people have. So there are a lot of like very stiff rules.
Yeah, a lot of performance, a lot of mask, and yeah, not a lot of room for vulnerability. And creating something is extremely vulnerable. It
Yes.
is extremely vulnerable, and so you're having to just shut that down in order to exist in that space.
Totally. And it's interesting because even as I was going through design school, like most of my projects had some sort of like social justice, doing good aspect to it. And the message that I got from some of my professors was like, oof, like, be careful, like,
Wow.
you don't want to walk into an interview and you made this poster about this issue and the person interviewing you is like totally against that issue. So it's a lot of like that old way of thinking.
Yes, yes, about like how you appear and being like really trying to please others instead of pleasing yourself.
And staying in your place.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Wow, there's so much here. Um, so talk to me. Well, let me back up a second because I want to name something that one of the reasons you were invited to be on this podcast is because I think that you really have you talk about like there not having been a lot of room for emotions or no room for emotions. And the fact is, one thing that I admire is that your work is very emotional. Like you've really swung the pendulum in another direction, and you have like wonderful ways of bringing emotion into the creative process. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I quit my job in 2017, and I really had no plan, like no savings. I am very privileged that my partner had a stable job and that I was able to say, hey babe, not gonna pay rent for a while, need you to back me up here, and he did. But when I started that, I had nothing. And I had just walked off of a job where in tech where I was really burned out. I mean, I'm talking like crying every night, like drinking a drink every day, which is not like my norm. Um, and so I really was like at like ground zero, like I had nothing. And at that point, what I started doing is I started sharing how I was feeling because I had like nothing left, and something that I hate about like the way that things function in this country is that, especially for younger people who enter the workforce, like your job becomes everything, your friends, what you do, it becomes your whole life. And so when you walk away from that, you like literally have lost your identity. So I was in that point where I just started writing about how I was feeling, not really expecting anybody to answer or anything. And then I would get DMs from people being like, "Oh my God, like I needed to see that. So thank you." And so I was like, okay, I guess I do that right. I mean, like I at that point I felt like I didn't know how to do anything else right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So, where did it go from there?
Yeah, I started writing more, and at that point I was like, I knew I had to like pick something to focus on, and like immigration is, oof, I get so fired up about immigration, but I really felt like there wasn't much I could do there. Like I was like, I don't know how to fill out paperwork. I'm really bad at it. I don't have money to like give to people for their process. And so I decided to focus on economic empowerment. So I started writing more about like the Latina wage gap. I started interviewing people to like try to understand kind of how is their self-worth tied to their identity and how does it affect Latinas differently. Um, and from that point, I kind of started entering into like tech incubators, which are these like programs to help you build a startup. So I tried building like a mentorship platform for Latinas. Um, and I kind of just like kept following that until eventually I just ran out of money. I ran out of like credit cards to continue funding my research.
Yeah.
And so then and by that point I had met a lot of mostly women of color like myself who were launching things for their communities, and who were struggling with a lot of the same things that I was struggling with. But I had an advantage, I think, due to my tech and design background, in that way. So I started helping people with the things that I knew that I could help with.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. And I just want to share too for those listening that you you have a really strong sense like this, the researcher in you. I feel like you really do that well because you really, I consulted with you a couple of times and you really took me through the customer experience and you're really tapped into people's inner world. Like you have, as a psychologist, like I feel like I have a pretty good sense of what people need. And in fact, like you have a much better sense of people's experiences as customers, that I found to be so valuable. Like the way that you approached and the way that you your perspective on the journey and what people are looking for, what people are needing was really, really eye-opening for me. So that research is really, you have it in you. And that's a really different energy than what I see most people in marketing or in, it's not the same. You really stand out in that way. So yeah, talk a little bit more about the piece around safety.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. Yes, I love, like, I think a lot of the people, it's interesting because I was talking to one of my friends who is also a marketer, and she was telling me, "Oh, I have this client. They would be so easy. Like, they don't really care about this. They'll just pay you to do it." And that's when I had a moment where I was like, no, like the people that I love working with are the people that are like so passionate, so angry, so fired up that they like can barely like speak about it, you know? And what happens when we are so passionate and we are experts in what we do is sometimes we can forget what that looks like for people who don't know as much as we do, or, you know, have a different experience. So I really do love to help people really dig into their audience and like understand how are people approaching your work.
Mhm.
Um, I think so. The safety piece, you know, what's really interesting is I had one of those experiences that I think are really unique when I was in this tech incubator for Black and Latino women. And this incubator was like 9 months to help you create like a tech product, to help you get investments, to help you all of those things, right? And by like a life coincidence, at the same time, I was an adjunct design professor at my university. They invited me to come teach for a semester. And so I had this really unique experience where I was going through this incubator, which was like one of the most difficult things I had ever done. Um, and then at the same time, I was teaching students to design, and I was teaching them to design brands, etc. And I started kind of noticing this pattern, you know, with my students. Like, there are my students who, you know, who come from families that know that graphic design is like a legit career, who have money to live on campus, who have money to buy a computer, who have support from their family, who aren't working. And the thing with design, it's a very visual field, obviously, but like unlike writing, where like you might write something and your professor sees it and nobody else does, in design, everybody sees what you create. If you're creating a brand, we literally put it up and we look at what everybody did. And so I started noticing a difference between my students who clearly came from a safer background versus my students who were riding the bus to school, you know, coming in on the weekends to use the school computers, working 3 jobs, and the risks that they were able to take. Like, obviously the work, and with design and a lot of art, a lot of the times the amount of time that you put into it shows, especially when you're first learning.
Yes.
And so clearly, like, my students who had that access to safety um, had, like, they were able to spend 20 hours on a project when somebody else had less time. And I started noticing the same thing happening in this incubator that I was in. Like, those who had support, whether from a partner or from a job, who had that security, the way they showed up in the incubator, which met twice a week, was pretty intense. Um, was different than those who were like really struggling with childcare, or struggling because their partners weren't supportive of what they were doing, or because they were working 3 jobs, etc. And so I started to realize that, well, number one, really the creation process is the same whether you're making a poster or starting a business. And two, that safety was a huge piece, and you being able to take bigger risks. And it's really those bigger risks that amount to bigger rewards.
When you talk about safety, how does fear play into that? Like, what is the connection between, because you're talking about safety and it sounds like you're connecting it to support. And I'm wondering how fear plays a role.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's interesting because I think all of us are afraid. I think some of us are better at like being like, all right, we're just going to keep moving with the fear, because because the consequences of whatever you do are smaller, I think. But I think when what you're doing, so for example, like, people that I know that quit their jobs, but maybe had like savings. And so it wasn't such a huge risk. Like, sure, they have fear, but the impact that it could have on their lives is smaller than, like, for me, who has like student loans and credit card bills, and my family, depends on me and all these things. So fear, to me, the fear is like kind of proportional to the amount of safety that you have in a way.
Yes. Yeah. No, and it's a question I ask because, to tell on myself here, fear and self-doubt have been sort of my biggest demons in the creative process. Like, and it's not connected necessarily to money, although, right, if I don't create a certain amount, well, then I can't feed myself, etc. But it feels more like a deeper place around like how I'm seen, or being judged, or things like that, like the self-doubt around, is it good enough, how will it be received? Yeah, there's some deep places to go into there.
Yes, totally. Totally. And like, I've worked with dozens of people, and we all have that fear and self-doubt. It just manifests in different ways. And this, it's sneaky. Like,
Yeah.
it's sneaky, and it gets in there. But to me, that's why it's so damaging to be in these programs like that I'm mentioning, or these spaces that demand perfection, that demand that you don't talk about emotions, because we're not really addressing those fears and that lack of safety, which once you have that, you can build whatever. But what I see is a lot of people, and myself included, when I talk about like my journey in all of this, is there's a point where I was reading all business books, I was watching webinars, I was getting coached by business coaches and salespeople like all the time, and there was a point where I just like it came to a screeching halt, because I realized that my problem wasn't those like upper level strategies. My
Yes.
problem was it didn't feel safe to get paid. It didn't get safe to make money. And because of that, those strategies were bringing me clients and bringing me things, but I just kept flicking them away.
This is something that I hear a lot from coaches now, from business coaches now, that it's never about not having enough strategy. And there's a place in us, right? Like the cycle that you were in was like, get more strategy. Like your brain wants more strategy to try to fix the problem that's not related to strategy, that it's always about the deeper work. And for me, entrepreneurship has been a whole spiritual journey. Would you agree?
Oof. Yes. Yes. That's always like, yes. And oh my gosh. And that's why, I mean, I think entrepreneurship is such a great way to push you to personal growth, but also it's like, it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Because like, if you work for somebody and you like kind of hit a wall with your personal growth, you can choose to sit there for years and not cross it, because you're still getting your paycheck, you're still getting your life. But with entrepreneurship, when you hit a wall, you stop making money usually, or you become so overwhelmed. And so I've become like obsessed in figuring out like, what are these walls, and how do I gently move around them?
Yeah, and I love supporting entrepreneurs because there is so much around visibility, around showing up, and something that I embrace for myself and that I practice, and that I think you do really well too, is the authenticity piece, and in showing up as your flawsome self, right, with all of your stuff, and still showing up with the vulnerability, and allowing yourself to be seen in that, and that people really respond to it. People really connect with that, because that's how people are actually feeling.
Yes. And also like, perfectionism is one of the tenets of white supremacy, the fact that we have to show up perfectly. And I work with a lot of clients who are launching things. So we're working on their website, we're working on their pitch deck, we're working on their social media stuff. And there's often this like tether to like, well, it's not perfect or it's not ready. And there's so much power in embracing, the thing of just saying like, hey, like, here's what I have right now. And the thing, like the lie that we've been told is that we do have to have that like perfect look, but that actually blocks us from being able to connect with people because people are seeking that authenticity.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest comments that I get from people that just find me on the internet or whatever is they're like, I just like how you were honest. And I try to tell this to my clients all the time. I'm like, and you know what? Like, I understand that, because I think vulnerability is also like, it's tied to some sort of privilege too. Like for some people, some identities, some experiences, it is way more difficult to be vulnerable. And that's something that, I am very aware of when I work with people.
It's part of the safety, right? If you don't feel safe to be vulnerable, right? If you don't have that basis of safety, it's harder to be vulnerable. Yeah. There was something else. Oh, yeah. You talk about, right, you show up. I was thinking about like authenticity or being yourself as being on brand. Like just showing up as you is the new on brand versus the colors versus all the other things. Like just being yourself is on brand. And that there's people out there that say like you don't even need to niche, you're the niche, right? Just you being you is already attracts the people that respond to that, and that's enough. Would you agree?
Yeah. And I think the hard thing is that it takes practice,
Yeah.
and it takes a lot of vulnerability to practice. um especially like it's interesting because I think about design a lot, like literally design, like somebody learning how to use design software to make a poster or whatever, because that's the lens that I learned to look at the world through. But even when you're learning to design a poster, like you design a bunch of posters that look like something somebody else already made because you're learning. And I think it's the same when we're learning to be ourselves, is you kind of try on like let me try on this way of being, and then you're like, ugh, that was not it. Or you're like, oh, I liked this thing, about whatever, the way I spoke, the way I showed up. So it takes some trial and error, and that trial and error is like rooted in like being okay with being in progress.
Yeah, so many things come up for me as you say that. What comes up is, as you try on these different ways of showing up, right? You have to be in touch with some part of yourself where there's resonance with it, or where there's sort of like that doesn't feel right. Like you have to trust your intuition, you have to trust your felt experience about like your sense of what that feels like. And then also the piece around imposter phenomenon comes up. And I think that you've had some lives on Instagram about that.
Yes, yes. And you know what to me, the hardest thing about all of this is that all of us have a voice inside. Sometimes that voice is your intuition, your gut feeling telling you like, no, ma'am, not that way. Or like, yes, that was right. And sometimes that's like your critic, your that it's not a helpful voice.
Yeah.
And I know for me, so much of the journey has been, who's speaking to me right now? Because
Yes.
sometimes sometimes I hear like, "Oh, girl, do not do that," and it's from a like, no, actually you should do it. You're just really scared, And then sometimes I hear that and it's truly from a like, that's not aligned with you. So learning to tell that difference is huge.
Yeah, that's something that comes up in my work as well. And I try to orient people like, where's the voice coming from in your body, right? If it's coming from your head, it's usually like maybe not always the best. But if it's coming from from your belly or something, or, if it's speaking to you in a harsh tone, question that, right? The neutral or the kind teacher is the one you might want to go with, but it sometimes is the riskier choice, right? The risk, like, put it out there or do this thing. Sometimes you get a download from spirit and you're just like, really, should I do that? And it's like, yes, do it, put it out there. And you're scared shitless and you're doing it anyway. So yeah, it's an intense process sometimes.
And
Yeah.
I think that's where having community can be really helpful too. I mean, in all of this, community is the most helpful. Like if anybody's listening and you want to start anything, go find people who are doing it and who are talking about it. But it helps to be like witnessed, to have somebody or even a coach or somebody that you're working with that's like, hey, last time you were kind of freaked out to do this, and now I hear it again. Like, are we sure? And you were talking about imposter phenomenon a little bit ago. And so for me, like imposter phenomenon, the understanding the cycle of imposter phenomenon is helpful because, and that's something that I teach my clients, because it can be helpful to be like, hey, I see you hesitating, which is fine. Let's just double check that this isn't what's happening. And if my approach is very much on helping people find ways of showing up that feel good to them. And sometimes it feels good even though it's a little bit scary. And then sometimes it's a little bit scary and you have to try it anyway. So it's about having somebody that understands you personally,
Yes.
to say, hey, but this, you could do this. This is similar to this other thing that you did. Or, you do this so well when you think nobody's watching you.
Right, exactly. What has been your biggest hurdle to overcome in your process of entrepreneurship, in your creative process?
My biggest hurdle has been to let go of the idea that somebody else knows more than I do about what I should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like being like, no, actually, I know what I should be doing. And I should listen to that inner voice before I listen to anybody else.
What has that journey been like for you? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, quite literally years of following other people and kind of like betraying myself and being like I know I should have quit this like 6 months ago and I didn't, and I'm not going to do it again. And then I do it again. And then I'm like, shit, I did it again. I said I wasn't going to. Now for real. So literally years of, being like, oh, maybe I could build my business this way. And then following somebody's approaches like down like perfectly, and then being like, that didn't work for me. Or what happened a lot was I could have made that work in a way that felt really, really, really bad. And so I choose not to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think after doing that so much, I got to a point where I was like, I don't even really care if this works or not anymore. I'm just like not willing to betray myself again.
Yes, yes. And didn't you, I think it was in the fall of last year, you took a break.
I did. Yeah, I did. So when 2020 started, right when 2019 ended, I was still like full on doing Vomeless Ladies and trying to figure out how to grow that community. And then when 2020 started, I was like, I have to make money this year. Like I have gone too many years saying this is the year. And I was like, 2020, I was like, this is my year. I set money goals. I started working with a sales coach. I like did all those things. And then 2020 hit and I was like, at the beginning of 2020, I was like, I'm going to focus on helping people with branding. That's my area of genius. I can help people with that. But then 2020 hit and I was like, maybe I need to help people make money. So I'll focus more on like kind of like business coaching, brand coaching. And I like doubled down on that because I felt that that's what people needed.
Mm-hmm.
And part of my skill set is helping people figure out like systems and what services to offer, et cetera. But I stepped into this kind of like business coaching role which just didn't feel good. Because, my family, when they moved here, they started a business, and that thanks to that business, we have been able to live. But also because of that business, we have not been able to live. I
Mm,
started realizing through 2020 that I really wanted to help people create a life that they love, whether or not it is because of their business growing. So
mm,
all of this was happening in me. And I just was, again, trying all these strategies from all the different coaches, not feeling good. And then around November of 2020, I was just like, that's it. Like I did all the things that did not work. I got really into human design and astrology and just spent like a month listening to podcast about human design and really, you know, working on becoming an Akashic Records reader, like all these different things that I felt called to, but I felt like I couldn't be that and a brand person and a business coach. Um, and so that's when I like let go of all that. And now I'm focused on creation and creativity and helping people trust their voice, trust their fire and create that safety for themselves and for myself too.
that's so amazing. I love how you sort of went into this other, you did like research. You went into this research place again. And in fact, I love human design as well. I feel like it is really, there's a lot of people blending human design with business and how to approach business and how to approach like even business structure or creative work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is your special sauce around like what you do right now with the creative process? What is your unique approach?
I think my unique approach is really, right now, I'm really interested and really focused on helping people like stop listening to those outside voices, whatever they may be for them, and start figuring out how to trust themselves into doing something. So I've been doing these 30-day of creative risks challenges where like the whole purpose is for you just to create for 30 days. Um, and so it's interesting because in 2020, I ran this 30-day program and I was like, I'm going to teach you about strategy and marketing and your audience and all these things. And I had 10 women go through the program and only one finished because people got so stuck on the strategy portion. They're like, oh, but I don't know who my audience is, all these things. And that it's kind of ironic because the only way to find the right strategy is to take a lot of experimentation and
Yes.
just create things. And as you create things, you will start to be able to create a strategy around that. So I've shifted from focusing with people on strategy to focusing on just helping them create things, take risks, use their voice, and then we can build a strategy on top of that. And of course, for my people who are like more advanced or have been doing this for a while, have been creating, like I do also work with people just on the strategy portion. But what I'm the most excited about is just to help people create anything.
What's coming up for me as you're talking right now is that thinking about the safety piece again, right? If you're from an immigrant family, if you're from a family who maybe has fewer resources, maybe you don't, maybe in your most creative years, like when you're young, maybe there wasn't as much room to create. And so you're not as connected to that muscle. That muscle is just not as developed. And it takes, right? There is maybe like a coaxing or a process where it's really important to help people learn to make mistakes, to get used to doing something over and over again. And I see it with my own kids that they make a mistake and they just keep trying. They do the same drawing 15 times because they want to get it the way that they see it in their head, or they want to feel a sense of satisfaction. And I know now in my adult self, like I get, in my own perfectionism, I give up in like, try number 2 or 3. you know, and don't make as much room as my own kids make room for themselves. And so there's something really there about like, what is that factor?
Yeah, I think it's number one, kids are amazing. Like we have so much to learn from them. Um, I I think it's really in like kind of an embodiment practice in a very different way. You know, because we're in a world that tells you like if you want to call yourself a writer, you have to like fit all these requirements. Or if
Right.
you want to call yourself a designer, a creative, like it's like this external thing. But truly, if you want to be a writer, you just have to write every day for long enough,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it taps into this internal validation. It taps into your skill starts advancing the more that you do it. It taps into, there's even this like, this whole energetic thing, I think that happens when you're just living it, that is able to bring you more of that.
yeah, yeah.
And
It's
from a practical standpoint too, is the more that you do the work that you want to be doing, like this is true for designers. Like if you're a designer and you want to be making a lot of websites, you have to make some websites for free or for cheap to put on your website so that people know you make websites and they call you for it. So this also taps into that, which is like you want to be writing more or you want to be doing this, you kind of just have to do it until people know that you do it. And that's how you become known as a person that does that.
yes, what you're saying right now is also what I teach in the practice itself. You become through the practice. Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that.
And I think that that is what, you know, because most people that I work with are come from a marginalized identity who want to do something. They want to create a business, a nonprofit, a project, an initiative to help their communities. But the wall that I most often see people hit, which is why I started focusing on this work right now, is that self-trust. It's not the lack of strategies, it's not the lack of anything other than they're doubting whether they can be this thing. And so through this practice, what I hope to strengthen is that, which then that confidence gets transferred into other areas of people's lives. Like if I can do this and I can show up in this way, maybe I can apply for that job, or maybe I can launch this thing, or I can launch the service.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. This is, and I really hope people are getting this as they're listening, is that when you develop that muscle, right, whether it's the courage muscle or the vulnerability muscle or the creative muscle, it fans out into every area of your life, right? Self-trust. And that's why that inner work, not the strategy, but the healing work is sort of the centerpiece of of anything that you want to do in your life, however you want to create, whether it's creativity in business or creativity in relationships, in your sexuality, like however you want to do it. Yes, I love that. I love that we're here in this place in the conversation. Yes. So, Pamela, how can people get in touch with you? How can they get in contact with you? How can people access your services?
Yes. So I'm on Instagram probably too much. So I'm MS, like Ms. Pamela Barba on Instagram, and that's also my website, MsPamelaBarba.com. Those are the two best ways to get in touch with me.
Yeah. And what kind of services are you offering right now?
Yes. So I'm actually I'm starting to host free community like accountability hours where it's like literally, you know, log on to Zoom, we'll co-work. You'll tell me what you're working on, we'll co-work, and then the session ends. So it's just holding space for people to do whatever they need to do, whether it's like, you know, make that dentist appointment or write your bio or look at your website, whatever. So I'm really excited about that. And then I will be relaunching my 30-day risk challenge probably in April, late April.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, awesome. Definitely. If you're listening, jump on that. Pamela is amazing. Yes. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
this conversation. I feel, yeah, there's a lot of energy in this conversation. I'm so happy that we made this time to meet and chat.
Yes, this was fun. Thank you,
Yeah.
Isha.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Bye.